We spent more than 300 billion. Only now are we approaching 60, 65 energy availability factor. If only we could stop the bleeding. We don't have to be cap in hand. Now we stand the real risk of occupying the world record for all the wrong reasons. This is a country that had potential going like this. 27th of April, 1994, snaking queues ushered in our first democracy, gifted with Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela, who inherited a technically bankrupt country. In 5 years, quadrupled the GDP of this country. Potential like this. Handed over seamlessly to Thabo Mbeki, something that's never done in the world, seamlessly. Without firing a single bullet. Who went on to give us 43 consecutive quarters of positive GDP growth, culminated in October of 2017, where we touched 5.6% GDP. Since then, we've never. The last 15 years, we're less than 2%. Last 10 years, less than 1.5%. And net population growth on average is 1.5%. So in real terms, we're going backwards. And you see this in our GDP figures. We've reclaimed our number one spot as the largest economy in Africa. But it's $400 billion US. It was the same in 2016, which means your disposable income and discretionary purchasing power buys you less today compared to the same period in 2016. We feel it in our back pockets. Now the world will remember us as a country that squandered this opportunity. But they'll remember us for being the country with the highest inequality in the world, at the Gini coefficient of 0.63. 2010, we took over from Brazil. The country with the highest unemployment rate in the world. It's so bad, we even try to hide it. We measure unemployment in two ways. You know, if you run a company, you want one set of management accounts so that you can take action. But if there's 5, you can't hold anybody accountable. So we use the ILO definition, but also we use our own narrow definition. We exclude people that have been looking for a job for the last 36 months, but they're still unemployed. My grandmother says, when your neighbor is hungry, you cannot sleep at night. Not the poor neighbor. But even on a narrow definition, it's almost 33% if I round off the figures because I'm amongst family here. But that's 42% on an expanded definition. Take 33%. You know what caused the Arab Spring? Deposed 5 sitting presidents, including Hosni Mubarak of Egypt, who was in power for 33 years. That self-immolation that started in Tunisia started with an unemployment rate of half that. So I'm hoping that as a direct result of our conversation this afternoon, maybe, just maybe, the 2 weeks in July of 2021 that happened, banned 10 shopping malls, 8 warehouses. We looted 1,400 ATMs. We stole 100 million South African rands. The economy of KwaZulu-Natal lost 30 billion. Spilled over to Gauteng. We lost another 20 billion. Collectively, 50 billion. All of them lost within the first 4 days. And our police people were folding their arms, not even pretending to take action. Now when you listen to the Madlanga Commission, you understand. Justice Madlanga himself says, I knew it was bad. But even I didn't know it is so bad. Because what's rotten to the core? It's not the South African Police Service. No, it's the very top. Where the National Police Commissioner is on suspension. The Deputy National Police Commissioner is on suspension. The other Deputy National Police Commissioner IPIT is investigated, it's just about to be on suspension. So this is it's a systemic failure of SAPS. Now we understand why crime is running absolute rampant, because the criminals know that they're having it easy and they have the top guys in their back pockets. But the third is the country that has the highest SME failure rate in the world. We chose to be part of BRICS, and in the BRICS countries, and now BRICS Plus, after we added 6 more, new jobs created by SMEs, it's north of 60 percentage points. In this country, south of 15 percentage points. The other day, I was talking to the board of airline representatives of South Africa, and I said, it takes us 3 years to start a new business. Somebody who works for government at the back, at the end, and we're doing question and answers, he says, I've just Googled. It says on my Google that it takes us 1 to 5 days to register a company with CIPSI. I said, I rest my case. If registering a company with CIPSI is starting a business, then we are in more trouble than I thought. But for somehow, somebody feels compelled, because you see, when you work with thieves, you think you get your legitimacy by defending the indefensible, instead of speaking the truth. Because if you speak the truth, you don't even have to have a good memory. I'm a good Catholic boy. Even my Bible says the truth will set you free. But we're also the country with the highest GBVF rate in the world, not by a factor of 2, but 5 times the global average, to show that collectively as a people, we haven't even started dealing with our collective trauma of 400 years of colonialism, 98 years of separate development, 48 years of institutionalized apartheid. Just to deal with it, to go and deal with it and say, like an Alcoholics Anonymous, that I am an alcoholic, that I have a problem, that I'm wounded. Because my grandmother says, when your own brain is inflamed, how do you even begin to love? Because this thing called love is seeing yourself in another. So if I'm trauma, of course I see trauma in the other. So what needs to be done as I work towards closing, because there is a moment to take a question or two, right? That's where the value, the utility is. So what needs to be done? Maybe let me proffer just a few, and then I'll shut up and take your questions and comments, but also your violent disagreements. Good leaders invite conflict. In bad companies, they kill conflict. No, you can't. Here it's allowed. So this is an elective year. 2029 will be national elective year. How about if we started by just accepting and internalizing that we are the ones that hire the politicians, not the other way around? That at the very least, we can exercise the power of the X to peacefully get rid of the bad ones. So what we have seen in the past, the bad ones, all of them have been promoted. So the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture by then Deputy Chief Justice Zondo Mpigelele Raymond. 487 was the first report. He calls out by name 97 ANC individuals who have been found with their hands in the cookie jar. Up until today, not a single successful prosecution. That commission cost us 4 years. It cost R1 billion. We did. So number one that I thought maybe I'll submit for consideration, kind consideration, is maybe we would elect leaders that can help us to defeat and root out state capture. If I had time, I'll tell you that in the first 5 years of state capture, we stole 1.5 trillion rands. That's 2/3 of what Edward Kieswetter collects a year, every year. The second one is to demand that the unfinished work of transformation, it's less fashionable to talk about it now, must be completed so that this economy looks like us. Because you see, the majority of our people are not reaching their potential. I'm not even talking about their fullest potential, just their potential. They are underemployed and underutilized. It's like going to war and you leave 90% of the population behind and you hope to be victorious. How? The third, I think we need ethical leadership. It's tautologous. Leadership can't be anything else other than being ethical. But for emphasis, we differentiate ethical leadership. My grandmother says, ethics is not what you say, it's what you do when no one is watching. The fourth is, we want to elect leaders who understand that their primary job description is service delivery. The influent municipality for 20 years, Swedish has been running through not early childhood development centers in people's homes. 20 years. 20 years, the people of Hammanskraal did not have clean running water. That's the best vaccine against cholera. Huh? Just access to clean running water. The last one for me is to elect leaders that would give us law and order, safety and security. Because South Africans are not safe walking on the streets. I can almost understand because they are exposed. But they're not safe sleeping in their homes, their fortresses and castles, because that's where the contact crime is increasing. Law and order, safety and security. Is it okay to stop there, men, take a question or two? Because you see, when one steadily burns the midnight oil, one gains access to the domain of knowledge and wisdom, the world of meaning, the world that has no frontiers, the world that cannot be conquered without a persistent crusade. Politicians hate educated Black people because educated Black people make it impossible to be fooled by unscrupulous politicians. Let me take questions and comments before I leave you in peace. Who wants to start?
I'll start.
Okay, I see the boss there as number one. I see Mel Ntate the back. So you are the new number one because she's the boss. He's argumentative. You are the new number one. Mel, you are the new number two. You have a lawyer. Yeah. So number one, number two, let's see who's being represented this side. You are number three.
And four.
4 and 5. Let's see how it goes, and then I know I'm done. Ntate, katlhompho.
Thank you, Prof, and thank you for your insightful comments. I cannot claim to really represent anyone here, but we are mostly inundated with bad news in this beautiful country. I sometimes even refrain from watching TV, avoiding this negative picture. In my culture, there's something called matlhabisa ditlhong, meaning things that you rather not associate with. I don't know how to explain it. Maybe somebody can explain it better. And when you are facing matlhabisa ditlhong, you start avoiding people, you hide, you don't want to be seen in public because this is just bad. So you've just ignited that with the comments that you've just made, Prof. And when I came here, I was hoping that you'll probably share with us some brighter things so that we don't get out of this session really feeling, you know, the way I feel now, you know. Now, my question is, can you please share with us if there are any positive signs that you are seeing in the light of all that is happening around us? One, or is it doom and gloom, rather? And what is it that we really need to do? Maybe 2, 3 things that we need to do as a country to turn things around, really turn things around. And I'm not talking about talk shows or anything. I'm talking about things that more at a practical level. We know what civil society can do, but I know you come from the business community. I would like to know what role is it that business can really play? Because to some extent, partly the reason why we are in this mess, in some instances, the business community has had a hand. Thanks.
So I will end with the good news. I'll end with that. Because you see, sometimes as a people, as a country with great natural endowments, we're very quick to say, no, let's move on. Let's focus on the positive. But if you don't know the extent of the rot, you might fix wrong things. If the 6th of July, 2025 did not happen, most people would not have believed that actually it's this ANC-led government that is an organized crime syndicate. Many wouldn't have known that actually it's the top brass of the SAPS that's rotten to the core. Many would have never heard the other Mkwanas of Ekurhuleni and ask themselves, but where do these people come from? Who hires these people? When there are so many good people and we choose these people. That's why in Alcoholics Anonymous, they don't start first with a cure. They say first look at yourself in the mirror and accept that you are an alcoholic. You can't say, no, I'm an occasional drinker. The problem is that there's an occasion every day. So I'll end with that. There's some good news. Of course, there's some good news. But it's not the good news that brought us here. Number 2.
Yeah, thanks, Prof. I hope you have moved from Serbia into the beautiful sun of South Africa. You are totally forgiven. Thanks for also sharing how personal it absolutely has to be. Because we've become so selfish and so caught up, and the issues are not personal anymore, and we distance ourselves. So thanks for naming that, and that we have to jointly own the issues. I'm also appreciating that your second point around transformation, we don't speak about that honestly and often enough. And until as family we speak the truth, we're going to still muddle in and the what's not happening and why, and not being authentic around the why. And so thanks for naming. I appreciate all the points that you named. I'm curious at a kind of continental level. If we had a magic wand and all the debt is written off and no one goes to Hagen, wherever, to ask for money, and would that make a difference?
So let me start with 2 things that you said, which are absolutely profound. Because I think it raises something that's very important. It's manifestly in businesses' own interest to have a transformed South Africa, because they'll make more money. Transformation is not in and of itself. It's about accepting that it's unsustainable, that there's 65 million of us, but 30 million live below the poverty datum line. 10 million young people are not in education, employment, and training. 6 million boys have never seen their father. that 32 years into democracy, we've just graduated from having black people representing 14.3% of the C-suite to 14.4% in 32 years. And yet they are 90% of the population. At this rate, it will take us 300 years to be broadly reflective of the demographics. Because that's the end game, is to ensure that this economy is broadly reflective of the demographics. And what are the demographics? 52.5% of these 65 million South Africans are female. It's people who don't look like me. And yet their representation in positions of leadership is less than 24%. African women less than 4%. It's not sustainable. In the interest of time, let me just end with Sir Henry Royce. Says, is it possible to find something that is good and make it better? The other, Henry T. Ford, says, we must make cars that our own people can afford. Because there's a problem when you're a business and your own employees can't afford the goods and the services that you provide. Put differently, when business creates jobs, it's not an act of corporate social investment. You are creating a market of the future. As South Africa, we're too small, 65 million people. America can afford to be arrogant. In 2010, there were 300 million of them. It's a 300-year economy. China is a 5,000-year civilization. That's why Trump can impose tariffs as much as he wants. Xi Jinping is not getting an ulcer because he looks as it's 4 more years. That's all it is. And after 2, they'll have primaries. If they lose some seats, he's a useless president. Look at that sense of perspective. Let me look at number 3.
Good afternoon. I'd like to start with saying that thank you so much for the inspirational talk. And you have mentioned a lot of things that are actually not going good in our country. But I also wanted to indicate something good that he was looking for. South Africa is quite a resilient country. If we look into the trauma that we have suffered as a country, we are getting there slowly but surely. Yes, there is room for improvement, which is why I want to again say what you have actually been saying, because that is also one core passion of myself, which is interventional, being interventional and being intentional about what is it that we need to do as individuals in South Africa, starting with our own self, finding solutions with our own self, being an unemployed social worker, now advocating for unemployed social workers, looking at the outside borders and looking outside the box of the norms, and moving away from the narrative of where are we going to get grants, where are we going to get money to start our enterprises or to start our businesses or our practices. We are actually now looking at not government, but private entities, whereby we are utilizing GEMS and other medical aids to actually be able to monetize our degrees. So that is the intentional, interventional way that I wanted to actually confirm or agree with you that as individual, we actually need to tap into that. And another thing is that it is quite personal for me, and I would like everybody maybe in here, in this platform, to actually live understanding that there is a lot of gaps and ills in our country, but we can't leave this summit in the negative form of everything is collapsing and there's nothing that we can do. We have the potential to uplift our own self and to uplift our own country. And my question to you now comes into that. How can we utilize our capacity and our resilience to actually heal our economy and eradicate poverty? There was a poverty eradication plan that is supposed to be ending in 2030, but looking into it and how it's going now, you can actually see that nothing is actually going to reach those targets that were mentioned there. But we are resilient. I want to repeat this, we are very resilient, and we can be able to do what was done in 1994 if we put our heads together and we stop looking for solution elsewhere, and we start within ourselves.
Wow. Why don't we put our hands together for her? But let me give you two more interjections. I wanted to make it one, but two. Because you see, you have to confront the monster in the face. English has a wonderful expression, it says, grab the bull by the horns. But understand the magnitude of what we are facing, and then we'll come to solutions. I'm a township thug, born, bred, and butter. I didn't I didn't know Charlize Theron. And I went to medical school at Wits to do MBBCH, 1981, because I looked around Katlehong Township where I grew up. We relocated there when I was 6, forcibly removed from Kwa Dugatol. It's modern day Rainsworth. And looking around, all the people who lived in biggest houses and were driving the smartest and biggest cars were clinicians, mostly GPs. Bondate Joel Matsipa or Dr. Mzamani. And I said, that's what I want to be. So I go to Wits, and the dean is Professor Philip Tobias. May his soul rest in peace. He says, why do you want to get into medical school? I said, no, I was brought up by my mother. My father died when I was 17. So I want to do something that will give me the most amount of money in the shortest period of time. He looked at me and laughed and said, you are in. He said, I listen to such cock and bull stories here. Why people want to be doctors. I want to save humanity. I want to reduce suffering, etc. You are the first one today who's told me the truth. That's how I got into medical school. But that's not why I'm telling you the story. Because I never thought that in my life, there'll come a time where the people that are considered to be on the top of the food chain, today in Gauteng alone, have finished their studies, 800 of them, but unemployed. Because Gauteng says we have no money to hire them. But there are vacancies that exist because 70% of their budget goes to people. You see, when you steal money, eventually it gets finished. That's the first interjection I just wanted to share with you. But before I share the second one, let me go to what we can do personally. And then I'll talk a little bit about what business can do and what government can do. Government I can leave because that you all know, exercise the X. But also we know that those people that choose to be civil servant, by that choice, they are choosing that the best amongst us lead with the heart of a servant. When you choose to be a civil servant, you are also making another choice. You're foregoing the Bentley. That the Toyota Tez is okay. That's a choice you make. Because there are no civil servants I know of in the world. 198 countries where the civil servants drive Bentleys, except here. But if you are a business, there is no way that she's reminding us to go online. For sure, we'll take that one online. She's the boss. Her name is Kelly. Otherwise, she'll remind me. So for business, I said it's manifestly in their interest, but also because business can't continue to be an island of prosperity in a sea of poverty. Because when business does well, society does well. Doing good is good for everyone at a personal level. What can we do? That get the good news at a personal level. Some of us, sometimes we don't realize the power that we have. There's nothing more painful when you are an eagle and you walk around with chickens and you start believing that you're a chicken.
Yep.
So we buy homes now as Black people. So 12 million homes are registered under individuals. Only 7 million own those homes. The others are renting. But when we buy even a house in Branston from Pam Golding, Andrew Golding is a dear friend of mine. I know the mother personally. But none of us as Black people think who's going to do the notarial services and the conveyance services. Who's the lawyer that's going to register this property? It's your money, it's your house. But you don't even ask. I'm buying this house from Branston. I'm paying you 5 million for it. Please make sure that Me Mokoso does the conveyancing because it's my money. It's all within your power. We do worse. On weekends, we walk around in our shorts and in our flip-flops, and we go into a BMW dealership and we look for that red BMW X5 with a white interior. And somebody jumps up and says, "May I help you, sir?" Why don't you look at Ma'am Madikesi at the back and say, "I want to buy it from you so that you benefit from my commission"? It's a choice you have. I can give you 9 other examples that even choosing to have a gardening service where unemployment is 42%. Why don't you hire just one individual and pay them 3,000 or 5,000 a month? They take their kids to school and they take one more out of the streets. But the reason I'm doing that is because many years ago when I was young and I had an afro, I was the president of the Black Management Forum. I was on that board for 33 years, ended up being their president. Mekuku Kumalo is my deputy. And say, let's not reinvent the wheel. In the 32 years of our democracy, there's only 3 communities that made money until it came out of their ears. It's the Jewish community, the Afrikaner community, and the Muslim community. One, because they've got capital. And ask them, how do you do it so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel? They shared with us 10 secrets. I don't have time, but let me just share with you 3 in one sentence. They ask the question, do you as a family and as a community regularly sit around the table and talk about how to make money? 2, do you as a family and as a community buy from each other and one another? Lastly, do you as a family and as a community invest in and refer business to each other and one another? If that's what the Jewish community is doing, it doesn't matter what a brilliant insurance salesperson you are, they ain't buying insurance from you. So you have to look for another market. Number 4.
I think it's online. If we can open the microphone for the delegate online. If you can look at the screen in front of you, I think. There should be one in front of you.
Hi, Makasa.
Good afternoon. Is it afternoon? I've lost even count of time. Thank you so much, leaders, and thank you, Dr. Prof. Obona. Yesterday I was there physically, and I think somehow I thought I was in a lost land. because what was uttered was gloomy and rosy, and I felt like I'm a lost island. Why I'm saying that is because the landscape of South African enterprise is made out of three types. The first one being the private sector, the second one being the state-owned SOEs that we know the state as we're speaking, and the third one being the social enterprise, the NPOs and cooperatives. And as you nailed it you nailed the nail on the cross well. Governance is an issue where I think I wanted to. I know it's not your problem; it was never caused by you, but the fact that we elect people to power that don't even know how to run even one SME. The very example that you made of somebody telling you that you can register in 3 days and then you've got an enterprise running, which is false. It takes so many years for you to have a viable enterprise. Now, I really want to say, given the fact that our SOEs, water, electricity, and transport, and you're talking about the trains, the rail, I don't know, at the state that corruption at its core, it even closed the SAA at one time. How best can we then make sure that, because I'm in the social space, the social enterprise, survive that, given the fact that we survive on funding, which the leaders were there and making it very gloomy that you can come to this institution, you'll be able to survive. And how do we then still entrust our SMEs by going to the same doors that we know when you're bringing an idea, it can be taken and given to an aunt or a cousin to really expedite and being funded. How best? I'm so sorry that I'm asking you. I know that you're not the one that came with the problem, but yeah, given that I know, I think I can blend and understand, or you understand our frustration at the local, because I come from Soweto. Thank you. Let me stop it there. But thank you so much for raising my hopes to say there is somebody who understands what you're saying when we say there's no governance, and people that were elected never knew governance, but they are governing us. Thank you.
Yeah. But let me advance maybe 3 things very quickly in the interest of time. So first is called a political economy, because it doesn't matter what you and I do, what the government does, what politics does, has a disproportionate influence on what we do. State capture rested on 4 pillars. The first one was to ensure that the decision-making is no longer done in the National Assembly, but at Saxonwold. The second one was to repurpose the more than 734 state-owned enterprises and state-owned companies to enable looting. 3 was to get rid of the good people who know what they're doing and replace them with people whose only claim to fame is that I know somebody who knows the minister. Otherwise, how would you explain Vusimu Ziket Matlala? He's mentioned by name in the looting of 2.2 billion in 6 months in Tembisa Hospital. By name. Babita Diokoran dead 4 years ago. SAPS sees it fit in their infinite wisdom to give him another tender for 360 million. The last one is to ensure that you now capture national treasury, because you're now not happy drinking from the hose pipe. You want to go to the fire hose, because national treasury owns 2 entities. One is called the largest asset manager in Africa, called the PIC. 3 trillion South African rands. The second one, they also own South African Revenue Service. Ours is one of the top 5 revenue collection agencies in the world, created out of 4 disparate things: Department of Finance, Department of Expenditure, etc. That's why the Guptas could land at the national key point, not far from here, Vonderboom Airport, And all the JMPD escorted them to Sun City. There's no one. They spent 30 million rand on this wedding, which the CEO of KPMG calls the wedding of the century. When they come back, they put this as a business expense. Because 18 months earlier, they've put in Tom Moyani as the commissioner of SARS. He allows it as a business expense. And the 30 million originally came from a Stina dairy farm for black people on the basis of BEE. So what could we do? Because that's the question. If you do the arithmetic, not mathematics, 734 SOEs and SOCs that we inherited, if we only allowed just 5 years with a woman as an MD of those, and you say 20% of them were going to fail dismally. After only 20 years, remember, we've been free for 30 with an unmitigated and unfettered majority without political interference. Today, we'll be talking about 3,000 women who know how to run complex entities. Out of these 734, more than 734 SOEs and SOCs, 28 of them are bigger than the economies of most African countries. Think of Transnet and ESCO, and Telco, much bigger. Today, that's what we'll be having. But that's not how state capture works. The last one, what can we do? Imagine for a moment if we had a little bit of thought in the way we're executing some of these things. Not a long time ago, we used the N3 called the Ben Schoeman Highway that joins Johannesburg and Pretoria. In the middle, there was something called Halfway House. There was only one shop there with a Coca-Cola sign, but also the Toyota head office that belongs to the Wessels family. At that time, we knew that the traffic between Joburg and Pretoria was 3 million cars out of a 12 million car park. And we built a freeway for 3 million cars, knowing that it was going to take us 3 years to finish. So you can see that some of our problems, we caused them ourselves. 2010, we spent 887 billion rands in building and renovating some existing stadium, 10 in total. We built one called the FNB Stadium in Soweto because she's calling from Soweto. Capacity is 94,000 people. For safety, they'll take no more than 88 so that it can decant. At the planning stage, they don't have enough parking for cars. But it's supposed to be our biggest stadium. There's a train station that stops nearby called the Prasa Railway. It can take more people because before we messed it up, 16.5 million used to go to work and come back a day just by train. That train station is not working. There's another one called the How Train that puts you at the door. At most, it can only take 4,000 people. So had we planned it a little bit, most of our events will be holding there, but also people would feel safer. Because now when you park your cars there, 20,000 people rock up with no tickets. Because they know that if I've got one ticket, at the gate, when I give it to this security guy, who's supposed to scan it and let me in, I give him the ticket. When he picks up the ticket, there's a 50 rand note underneath, and I get 3 of my friends. That's how we killed 22 people in Ellis Park during a derby. Because there were more people in the stadium than those that have seats, and the people with tickets were actually outside and said, no, nyege yenzeke le nto. And we're still doing it today. We haven't found a solution. And yet it's so easy. If we planned a little bit. I take the last one from the big boss and then I go.
I actually wanted to ask a question. No, actually, I wanted to ask a question on behalf of the delegates, because a question was asked before you came that couldn't be answered. And it had something to do with coordination of policy, resources, funding, that sort of thing. However you want to see the dynamic enterprise problem. But what came up is that you've got a national vision. It fails to be articulated at provincial level. And then it absolutely is either misinterpreted or completely ignored at local level. And yet this is where you find a lot of burgeoning SMEs. It doesn't feel like there's a vision, program, policy for them that really helps them rise up, grow. And so where exactly is this issue, and why is something not being done at the local level with a very specific focus on empowering SMEs? That was a question. And I wanted to say, what's your view?
Sure.
It wasn't my question, actually.
I know you to be much kinder than that. But this hits the nail on the head. Because if there was an Olympic sport for the development of plans, I swear to God, South Africa will be number one. A lot of kids walk around thinking that RDP is a house. They'd forgotten that that was our very first economic plan, the Reconstruction Development Program. And it had 5 priorities. Then we had Thabo Mbeki's macroeconomic policy called growth, employment, and redistribution. Then it was a skis, and then the 9-point plan. Then it became an alphabet soup. But execution, nothing. The plans, nothing wrong with them. NDP 2030, Trevor Manuel starts with 18 commissioners to say, what's our problems? They diagnose the problems and they say, we must do only these 9 things by 2030. It's clear, 2030, all those 9 things will be missed. But at the same time, Ibrahim Patel is the Minister of Department of Trade and Industry. Before it was called DTIC. He puts his own commissioners, 18 of them. They come up with a different plan. You'll think it's 2 opposing political parties. That's where the problem starts. The second problem is the plans are made at the national level, and then we put them into file 13. So what needs to be done in the interest of time? And we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Paul Kagame, like him or hate him, he only has 12 million people. Same day that we were voting, 27th of April, 800,000 Tutsis were massacred by Hutus. At the end of that month, 1 million. But only after 20 years, they no longer talk about Hutus or Tutsis, just Rwandans. If you go to Kigali today, in the public buses, you get free Wi-Fi. His cabinet has the highest percentage of women in the world, not in Africa. Out of 10 fastest growing economies in the world, 7 of them are in Africa, and 1 of them is Rwanda, with only 12 million people. And how did he do it? He went to Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore, that used to be owned by Malaysia. Their own parent company look at them and say, you are a hopeless backward. You are just a swamp. We can't rehabilitate you. You are free. They fired them. But Lee Kuan Yew, after 40 years, they put themselves up by their bootstraps and they became in the top 5 highest per capita income countries in the world. So I think one of the things we need to do more than anything else is national, provincial, and local, if we are going to keep that, because we only created it because there were many of us who came from the struggle. So we couldn't afford 4 premiers, 4 houses, 4 cars. So we said 9 provinces. It more than doubles it. That's the only reason we created it. But if we want to keep it, if we put our best people at local government, because that's where the rubber hits the road, that's where service delivery happens, and pay them more, you'd have done well. I think it's a good start. Lee Kuan Yew, one of the things that he did was to say, I know governments deal the world over. Here, we're going to do only 3 things. One, we'll talk about meritocracy, pragmatism, and honesty. I'll pay you more than any other government employee so that you don't have the propulsion to steal. But if you steal, we throw you straight to jail. And that's what he did. And he did simple things like you must stop littering. People think it was just about throwing chewing gum. He built apartments for his own people. But because they were so used to living in slums and in a swamp, they would pee inside the elevators. They put cameras and say, no, we're going to stop this. If we catch you peeing inside the lift, we call it in this country, we'll throw you to jail. The Singaporeans would open the lift door and stand outside and pee inside so that the camera doesn't catch them. But in 40 years, he had done that. You must watch the video where SAS for 10 consecutive years is the best airline in the world, #1 airline in the world. They go on strike. The whole president is wearing a white shirt. And it's folded halfway, and he sits them down. The president of the country. He says, we've got 2 choices. One, I can start another SAS from scratch. All of you will be unemployed. That's one option. And I'll do it tomorrow. 2, you take your paraphernalia now and you go back to work. They went back to work.
So I guess the answer then is political will, political will, political will, and the best people at local level, and then those local development models work. Thank you very much to you, Professor Bonang Mohale. We're now entering our last session for the day, and it is titled Strategic Partnerships, Knowledge and Skills. Please welcome Cleola Kunene, the CEO of Equate Trade Finance, Ms. Sonia Logenberg, the Head of Partnerships and Programs at the IDC, the Industrial Development Corporation, and Sbusiso Rapekwane, the CEO of the Transformation Legacy. I guess here what we're looking at is not even gender parity anymore. It's full women in leadership. Okay, put this over here. Hi, Cleola. Hi, Sonia.
Hello.
How are you? Have a seat over there. Okay, so a lot has been said, ladies, about working together, partnerships, collaborating, aggregating. A lot of things have been said in different forms as well. Even when we were talking about cooperatives, you know, shared visions, partnerships, collaboration. So whether you're looking at a financial model, a production model, a savings model, a value chain model, people are saying partnerships, partnerships, and skills. So let's start with you, Sbusiso. What enterprise models create stable employment?
Before we look at stable employment, we have to look at the systems that enterprises operate in. And as many speakers have said, our enterprises are operating in a broken system. And if we don't attempt to, fix some of the barriers in the system, then we cannot create sustainable jobs. One of the things that we need to get right is to develop dynamic enterprises, as it was mentioned yesterday. And to do that, we need enterprises that are skilled, that have the capacity and capability, and that are operating in markets that are growing and that they have access to. A lot of the enterprises that we speak to will say one of our biggest challenge is that we do not have access to markets. Yes, you can build our capacity. Yes, you can give us funding. Yes, you can build us, you can buy us machinery. But until we can actually access these markets, then our businesses will not grow. So that is the one, the first barrier that we have to address. And I know that in our context, there's just so much when it comes to markets that we have to work on. We also have to think about streamlining the industries that we can focus on, where we are going to deliberately develop dynamic enterprises to feed into those specific industries. Because right now it's broad. It's very broad.
I'm going to go a little bit offside here and say I was really stunned to learn that marketing, when you say somebody is in a marketing role, we think it's a PR role, it's a branding role, but actually apparently that's a sales role. And if you're not visible, you can't access customers. So telling your story, having open access, all of those things. So when we say access to markets, no matter what technical capacity, funding, all these problems you've raised, what are we talking about here? Because are we just talking about being able to get a retail space, a place to sell your goods, being able to tell consumers that you are here, being able to show creditors and financiers that you are growing? What are we talking about here?
I think it's a bit broader than that. In most markets, we do not have representation of enterprises. And we also do not have representation of Black-owned enterprises. So when we talk about access to markets, we have to start talking about how do we transform markets so that more Black-owned enterprises can access those markets. Secondly, how do we make available to enterprises that access? So how do we actually set aside some of the business in those markets specific to enterprises? Because we cannot expect these enterprises to be competing with the bigger corporates. That's the approach that we're taking now. But if we are really relying on small and medium enterprises to create jobs, we have to set aside some of these markets to those enterprises. Yeah.
All right. Cleola, let's bring you into the conversation. Same question, enterprise models that create stable and sustainable employment, because the conference theme has about 3 pillars to it. It's value chains, distribution, it's scalability, growth, dignified employment. So if you can get the first 2 right, how do we get that third one right?
Good afternoon, everyone. I think I've been in the private market space. I've worked with SMEs over a decade. I've been in the capital market space for a very long time as well. And I understand growth a little bit different. I look at, and I think often in South Africa, we look at the symptoms, not the cause. We're very driven talking about the symptoms of what we're facing. Of course, I mean, some of the very obvious causes are around corruption and all those things, but let's take a bit of a step back and understand what these things really mean in a high growth economy, right? Because market access is not addressable because we have only 1,050 large enterprises that make up 70% of our taxable income in the country, which means everybody's fighting for the same pie. That is not a market. That is just not sustainable. So let's understand a little bit. So I made a few notes because I listened to everybody speak, and I kind of want to just be more specific about some of the root causes and then how do we address it, right? So when we look at partnerships specifically, it's about embedded architecture in the economy, right? And when you look at embedded architecture, I'll give a few examples. In China, I mean, obviously, yes, China is big and they're old and all of those things, but China don't necessarily have better entrepreneurs than South Africa. We've got actually some of the best problem solvers in the world. Our solutions are far outpace in terms of their adaptability, their usability, and their impact on society than any technology or solutions you find in Europe or the US or things like that, right? But what are some of the challenges? Okay, if you look at China, what they did very well is they were very intentional about how they structured their economy for industrialization, right? And what does that mean? That means you can't say to an entrepreneur, go and manufacture and IDC is going to fund the manufacturing. It's a pointless exercise. And why? Because there's no infrastructure or market to support that. That means the goods that goes into the manufacturing, the production, are too expensive. There's no train to transport it cheaper. So the cost of manufacturing is too expensive. So that entrepreneur is out, you know what I mean? They just out from the get-go. They can't compete. It's too expensive. They just, you know, whereas in China, for instance, if you make something, your neighbor's going to make something, it goes into it, the train's going to come by your house, the market is set, the value chain is created, right? So that's why the economy is structured in a way that enables that, right? So when we talk about partnership, and especially strategic partnership and market access, funding access, is about how we architect things in a collaborative and ecosystem manner that ensures that everything works, not just one thing.
I'm going to ask you to elaborate on that because I've heard that China example as well. And I've also heard I think it's the Airbus example in Europe after the war, where France would make the wing and Britain would make the engine and this one would do these parts and Italy would do the interior. And so you build an aircraft knowing that each region, I'm going to say in this instance, is building something towards the final product. And so you develop an expertise in design, in manufacturing the steel or fabricating the steel or putting together the engine parts. China does a similar thing, we're told, where one province is known, Guangzhou is known for making pins that you use in the nuts and bolts for tires and axles for the car. And this one does that. In South Africa, what would that look like, creating that architecture?
So I think our challenge is where we come from. So we come from a commodity-based economy, which means we basically took raw materials out of the ground and just exported it. We never invested in mechanizing our economy, right? And then the services that came with it, that's why we've got such a large banking infrastructure, because we then developed intermediary services and financial services and then secondary services to support that. And then any other services came with the fact that we now had a populace, you know what I mean? So if you've got a large workforce, somebody's got to feed them, then you've got retail. Then agriculture, similarly, very commodity based. We also have a second problem in that we are very concentrated, which means there's only 4 large enterprises in anything, and there's a lot of red tape for other players to compete in that market. So the market entry is very difficult, right? So how that looks like is, first of all, you need to move away from being a consumer economy to being a production economy in something. And I'm not saying it has to be production in manufacturing, although that is preferable because it creates more sustainable long-term jobs. But say, for instance, if you said, okay, we want to compete in technology, you're not going to compete in technology if you're not willing to invest in the innovation that creates technology, right? Similar principles apply. What you create as an ecosystem and as an economy is what you fundamentally decide to invest in at the core. And how that investment also works structurally is that government creates, for instance, the baseline and the warranties and guarantees. Then private sector comes in with that, a competitive growth capital. So it's not a one size fits all, but that are some of the ways that we can fundamentally say, this is where we're going to compete, and this is how we're going to create that market over a longer period.
Okay, so I like things to be very simple for me. So let's just take an example. Everybody says the future is a green economy. I'm coming to you, Sonia. So if we said that's where South Africa is going to develop a competitive advantage, It's everything. It's the IP, it's the registration of the innovation for those developers. That's the first thing. It's then producing the photovoltaic, I'm not sure how you say that word, the stuff for the solar panels. Yeah. You produce them. You have factories that do that. It's producing, using your steel to set up those transmission lines. You do that. You do everything. You get the banks to start funding people who are doing solar panels. You do that. So
Yeah.
everything across the value chain.
Yes.
You have regions of the economy that make it, fund it, create around it, innovate around it.
Yes.
And then SMEs come into that space.
And I'll give you real examples of how we can do that. So if you look at, for instance, we've got the best quality minerals, top 10 minerals in the world. The IP for the iPhone was actually created here at CSIR, but we never commercialized it. You know, so South Korea did. So what happens now is that the production of the lithium battery is created in South Korea, and everybody else as an ecosystem works around the iPhones and all of those things. But that's a great starting point for us. We could actually just focus on how do we then go into, instead of just producing and, you know, there you go, we can just start there and say what we produce, we you know, what we extract, we produce, right? That improves our value by 45% already, what we can sell. So if you just say, instead of just taking manganese, we've got the best quality manganese coming out of KZN, Eastern Cape and Mpumalanga, instead of just taking the manganese and saying, bye, Bob's your uncle, we then create the policy, and that's where policy and government comes in. It says we produce, we then invest in that production up until the point where it is then the NMC battery, right? So that's a very straightforward example. Same principle in terms of IP. If we said we want to play in that space, we actually going to have to invest in thousands of ideas in order to get to the 10 that's going to give us the IP.
Sonia, over to you now, because a lot of those ideas need to be funded by someone. A lot of those partnerships would be SME to SME, B2B funding. So give us a sense of where you come in, what your views on this issue are, and how we create sustainable jobs.
Is this on? Good afternoon. Yes, so this is a bit of a passion for us as IDC. And as you were speaking, Cleola, about the innovation and talking about the innovation of South Africa. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the SPY and the PI programs, but we used to sit on those, and the Bluetooth concept was born from that, funded by government, just, you know, as an aside. But having said that, I made a few notes, which I quickly like to go through. I don't want to take too much time, but I heard a lot of negative things this morning, and it felt not great. I heard things about what is government going to do. My question is, what is private sector going to do? So, you know, as much as what I hear, government is this, and, you know, I feel very defensive about it because I see what we're doing in terms of that. And taking from that, I think IDC, as one of a very long-standing DFI, we haven't received funding from government since 1945. So it's one of those institutions that we make money from development finance so that we can reinvest. And I think the key factors that I want to take from what our discussions were this morning is we are currently in partnership programs and throughout the IDC doing a large number of collective enterprises that we're funding. And I think for me, what is important is what makes a success of an enterprise, whether it's a collective, cooperative, single person, whatever the case might be. And these are the things that I took away. Firstly, that there needs to be a confirmed demand, firstly for the product and for the skills. And if it's not there, then it needs to be localized. And I think, I can't remember, it was a JP, I think, mentioned about local economic development. It's critical. You know, we have a township economy partnership fund. Nobody wants to touch the townships, but let me tell you, it is one of the best transactions that we ever did, most impactful. NPLs, sorry, non-performing loans, 1.5%. Banks sitting at what, 15, 20%. Things are very different. They operate very different in the townships, and it's all about localization. people are living in areas, not just townships, rural areas, even in the suburbs. People are earning money outside the suburbs. They go to Sandton, they drive to Sandton, they come home, they have dinner stuff they buy at Woolies in Sandton. Instead of coming home and buying from the street corner cafe. And those are the kind of things that's very simple, very basic things, but that's what the sort of models that we as IDC are looking. And critical is the productivity and the innovation. We mustn't forget how innovative South Africa can be. Sasol is a prime example. Out of need was born. You know, my daughter and her fiance were telling me, oh, you know, with the war, we're going to get shut down. We're not going to get oil. And the tariffs, you know, the USA tariffs. And I was like, actually, you know, it would be fantastic if you can shut down South Africa's borders and trade again. And let's see what we can do. And those are the kind of things. But just very quickly on the models, and then I'll stop talking. Firstly, cooperatives. I heard that lady Tandeka talking about cooperatives. We don't have enough cooperatives. For me, it doesn't matter about the type of business, whether it's a cooperative, whether it's a PTY limited, whatever it is. If the fundamentals are not there, then it doesn't matter what kind of business is. So we at IDC currently have many models that we are collective models. It's cluster funding. We see it in the textiles industry specifically, where it talks about localization. You know, you have the large, for instance, of the Fushini group, they would cluster together a whole bunch of SMEs looking for funding, and just, you know, the textile industry is very big on just in time or quick supply. So localize that supply instead of importing and those kind of things. Then we're also working very closely on aggregation models where large corporates, and I don't know if you're familiar with the Soufflé project, Soufflé Malt, SAB. We have got a community involved in that project with small scale farmers so that they can't supply all of Soufflé Malt, but they can supply some. Yeah. And then obviously the social enterprises. And then lastly, we do have some models where we mustn't forget skills training, where skills are developed for you to become a self-sustaining enterprise. We have just a very quick example. We have quite a few projects where, as an example, out in the rural areas, farms, plots, you know, somebody with a couple of chickens in the back or a sheep or whatever the case may be, they need somebody to just maybe clip the toenails, etc. And those people have been trained, and some of them have now youngsters, about 1,000 of them have now gone out into the field and they are earning money. Those are the kind of models that work for us.
Just picking up on your point, but I'm not asking you to elaborate on would the tariffs ultimately stimulate a form of import substitution where we start creating some of those things ourselves? I know it's a bit of a controversial policy in a globalized world, but that's actually how South Africa survived many, many years of international isolation. And now we're seeing it in other parts of the Gulf states. You produce what you used to import and you develop manufacturing.
Yeah, so I think the tariffs were more an impact on our exports, and therein lies the problem. So the difficulty is you need diversification of markets. What it did do is it forced, and we didn't see much, and I don't know about you guys if you saw much of the fallout. We jumped on it and we said, let's have this facility. We're going to assist companies that are impacted, but not one company has come to us and asked for a facility. And the reason is that there was a very quick move, and especially from government. I mean, DTIC was all over it. They had engaged, they've got a desk set up, assisting people in diversifying their markets, not so much being dependent on one market anymore.
When an organization is formed and then scales, what is that process like?
Sure. I think that process really needs to be driven by firstly, I think firstly we need to start with the end in mind, right? We've built pipelines, but we've made it very program-based, and we've made it very short-term. So firstly, we need to start with the end in mind. And going back to the points that have been made earlier around identifying industries that we would like to focus on, where we know that we are going to deliberately develop enterprises. And once we've identified those industries, so going back to the example that you used around the green economy, then going back and saying, what does it take for us to build a dynamic enterprise that's going to be competitive at an international level in the green economy space, providing waste management services or providing carbon verification services. Then going back and say, okay, where do we start in developing these enterprises? And going to foundation, so the foundation being education, making sure that these enterprises have the entrepreneurship skills and business acumen to run businesses. Secondly, making sure that they are compliant, because compliance is also a key barrier to the sustainability of enterprises. So both industry compliance and business statutory compliance. And then thirdly, making sure that they've got access to funding. So how do we get them ready to get access to funding? Do they have, annual financial statements? Do they have a bankable business plan? And that in itself is a process. Then building up the entrepreneur themselves. So who is this leader behind this dynamic enterprise? Do they have a growth mindset? Do they think that they can build a business that can outlive them as a founder? Do they think that they can operate at an international level if opportunity is given? So how do we build the entrepreneur behind the business and make sure that the type of leader that can lead and run and sustain this dynamic enterprise? So that's part of the process. But ultimately, we really have to start with the end in mind so that we can see what we're going to need to build up this pipeline.
I do like that. So basically, from what Sonia has said, diversify your markets. You can't rely on one big market. So look at your opportunities, have a vision, which is what sort of Cleola said earlier on, and a policy, an industrial policy that speaks to that visioning, and then work backwards to say, this is what's going to be needed to achieve these goals. These are the kinds of businesses we're going to need. This is the scale of production. And this is what's fundable, bankable. And if you've got great ideas, but you don't have the expertise, let's help you with that technical support so that you're compliant and you can produce at scale. It's that sort of thing. Cleola, I don't know whether you want to add to that, functional enterprise pipelines.
Please clarify.
Okay, so really, when we're looking at that pipeline, we want some of these SMEs to be incorporated into different value chains. They could be at that local level, regional level, international level, but we want people being part of something, and somebody has to help them build. So it could be the green economy, which was the example I used.
Yeah.
It could be automotives. I keep hearing experts talking about local production of OMEs, and that sort of thing. So how do you fit them into this space?
So I think it's pretty simple. It's kind of like what is the business that we're in, right? Are we if we as a country are in the business of automotive, that's the business model that they can fit into. I'll give an example. In 92, I think India developed a strategy that said, think digital, think India, right? And they said, this is their business now. India is a digital business. India, a country with so many regions, they're digital. And under NASCOM, they then, exactly what you're talking about, they then looked at, okay, when we think digital, what is everything digital, the universe of digital today and for the future? And what does it mean for us to capacitate for that from a development perspective? That means your enterprise, my enterprise, etc. What do you need to do? What do I need to do, etc. And how are we going to collaborate within a value chain, which means you're teaching to make doors, I'm teaching to make, steering wheels, someone else is teaching to make tires. And then someone else is then nursing, meaning practical experience, and someone else is funding, right? And someone else is placing. And then they consolidated all the funding from private sector into different buckets in terms of you fund this, you fund that, you fund that. These are all the rules. And the rules is not different from NEF to IDC to whoever. Everybody plays by the same rules, which also makes life easier for the SMEs because it takes forever to apply to every single one and so much time, effort, money. And then once you go through this, you are then automatically on the procurement for the companies that are doing this, and then you supply. So why do I give this as an example? Because through that solution, which is a value chain enterprise development solution, India just alone on technical call center agents provides 7 million jobs to the US alone, right? Because it is a functional development. Whereas with us, I'm doing what you're doing. We're doing the same things. We're duplicating. When the SME is done with the development program, who's going to fund them? Who's going to employ them? Where are they going to get a procurement thing? So we need to start thinking about it in the concept. If we're saying value chain, we need to think about how do we collaborate as a value chain to create that? I think the second point is around procurement itself. Now, what we measure is what we get. We're measuring points, right? BE, whatever. But if you look at how companies are doing it, they're creating the points, they're getting the points, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're fulfilling the mandate of employing SMEs, right? Same principle for government. Our government, in fact, although, yes, government does have transformation and diversification as a mandate, but not even 30% of government procurement is for small businesses. Not even 30%. This is a fact. So we then need to put our money where our mouth is and be really specific about procuring from small businesses.
Okay. All right. So those are really some great points. Government procurement also with SMEs and coordination and eradicate fragmentation. So you can correct me if I'm wrong. So what I've understood is if you can qualify for an IDC funding as an SME, then the NEF mustn't be asking you the same questions. They can absolutely just look at the IDC log and see where
Let's standardize things. Why is everything fragmented? Let's start standardizing how we operate, because ultimately, in fact, what we're creating is also struggle for everyone. The banks are struggling, the DFIs are struggling, the private funders are struggling, and the cost of capital is so high in South Africa, nobody can afford it, not even the people providing the funding.
Fantastic. Sonia, your views on creating functional pipelines?
So I really like what Cleo said, and that is you can't talk, because IDC's got massive projects, large companies that we fund, but if we focus on, so our focus isn't really on small business, small, medium business, but what we did do, because it is in our act, the IDC Act requires that we actually fund SMMEs, strangely, but we don't have the capacity. So what we did about 3 years ago, and Modisi is not here anymore, but we opened up and we said, look, let's look at the non-banking intermediaries, because we did realize that those guys are the ones that have got the right digital platforms. And we have been rolling that program out and also working with the NEF. And it's hugely successful. We're learning, but exactly that. We need digital platforms that will connect small, medium enterprises within the funding community, so to speak. Whether that's going to happen, not sure. I know, an example is Treasury is working with the presidency on creating a national pathway network for work seekers, and that's slowly getting there. But we should have something similar for SMMEs. Yeah,
fantastic. And then let's talk about different models of partnership. I think Cleo has just kind of alluded to one. Just think outside the box. What else does thinking outside the box entail?
I think we've got a good example with the Automotive Industry Development Corporation is in Roslyn, and they've got a cluster model where enterprises in the automotive industry have the infrastructure, they've got the business development support, they also have, the back-end business support, all in, in one center, one cluster. And I think if we start thinking about models like that, looking at what has worked and how, what made it work, and try applying that to other industries where we are trying to build enterprises. But going back to making sure that we are selecting industries where there's growth and where there's an opportunity for enterprises to grow in that market.
I want to thank you for that example, because we've been talking China, the Airbus model, but there it is in Roslyn. And apparently, because they set up that kind of precinct for automotive and spare parts development, it created a pipeline of jobs for communities in Garankuwa and Mamelodi, the utilities, the water, the electricity supply, all of that connected even to a functioning municipality and forced the municipality to perform. So it's been done before, actually, in Roslyn.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, what I like about that cluster is that it brings everything together, even the regulation component, where they help, those enterprises to remain compliant, to register with CIPC, to make sure that they're tax compliant. So they've taken everything into consideration. And I think it's starting with examples like that and saying with, where we are currently, how can we replicate that and use that model?
Other partnerships, Cleola?
I really love that example. I actually think it's one of my favorites. I listed a few in terms of just examples. So some of the strategic examples, obviously I'm in the funding and market access space for SMEs. So close to my heart is funding. But apart from funding is also risk sharing. And risk sharing is very important because I'm a small funder. So we fund SMEs on the debt side, but we also invest equity into SMEs. Risk sharing in the form of guarantees, risk sharing in the form of co-investment, risk sharing in terms of even wholesale financing, you know what I mean? Or where we sometimes work with banks and DFIs and we prepare on the advisory side the deals for them and they know the quality is good. So that's also forms of risk sharing, you know what I mean? So risk sharing is actually one of the best ways that we can form communities because even for SMEs, it reduces the cost of capital for them. It reduces the impact on them when they get access to funding. And it also helps to hold them accountable when we also risk share with development organizations when we fund SMEs. So I can fund the SME, but when I collaborate with the development organization, they then ensure that that company continues to do what it needs to do, you know what I mean, to deliver. So funding and risk sharing is one. Then capabilities and innovation. Now it's really great that everybody's got innovative ideas and all of those things. But what really is amazing, and we've seen this in hubs, etc., is when innovation is shared. Because your idea with my idea, we can do a lot more. And also sharing the infrastructure around technology and all of those things, or even development resources. Development resources are very expensive. Ideas, all of those things. It makes a fundamental difference. But sometimes from a cultural perspective, we don't want to share. We have a perception that sharing creates issues in the long run. And maybe it has in instances, but we've also seen amazing examples where it creates sustainable growth. The last ones, we've spoken about market access and we've spoken about we've spoken a little bit about public-private partnerships. And I think there's a lot of conversation around that today, so I'm not going to repeat that. But around the one that you mentioned was around operational and supply chain. But even in terms of operation and supply chain, I think one of the ones that would be really important is also around infrastructure sharing. And one of for instance, we've got a group of companies that are food manufacturing, female, they were all doing their own little thing. And it was so expensive. So what are we doing? We're bringing them together, right? So they're sharing manufacturing resources. So the production is segregated, but dispatch areas are shared. Reception is shared. Machinery for labeling and all of those things are shared. What happens? Instantly, the cost comes down, but also that also means distribution is shared, and they're able to cross-pollinate in terms of markets that they go into. So that's one of the ones. And then, of course, community and networks. This is a critical one for entrepreneurs, that we need to share communities. So if I've got a contact, you know what I mean, at IDC, and I'm like, nope, I'm not going to tell you who I know at IDC. I'm literally, you know, robbing IDC of the opportunity and robbing someone of the you know, I mean, the opportunity. So we also need to get better at just sharing networks and sharing communities, especially for international market access, because then we all grow.
I'm going to bring you into a conversation that was had yesterday, just very briefly. It was a fun conversation. You were, yeah, so I'm going to bring you into it just very briefly, just because you said, you know, that's how you're wired. So when we talk scale, very briefly, you know, we're still talking about whether it's grant funding, then you elevate, maybe you can get some bank loans, elevate, maybe then you can do a bigger business where there's a bit of syndication, whatever. And I thought some of the things we haven't spoken about, and it just triggered my mind now, is I've not heard, maybe I've not heard, so you can correct me, where a local business, a regional business in the township has done so well that now you're ready to see equity coming in from elsewhere to help it build it up, like a private equity model, take it to the next level, then take it to the capital markets if you want to. We're not talking like that. Why?
So, I mean, I'm going to say something controversial. I don't like the term township business, because there's no such thing. The biggest, and I'm going to give an example. Sanlam. Who's Sanlam's biggest market? It's people in the township. Do we say Sanlam is a township business? I'm sorry, but it doesn't make sense. It's just because the person comes from the township and the business was born in the township. But market is a market. And in fact, the biggest market in South Africa are generally people in townships and people in rural areas. That is a huge market. It's 60 to 70% of our market. So it's not a township market. It is an underserved market, right? So sorry, it is controversial because people don't like to hear it, but this is our market. Everybody gets money from them, but we somehow think that, but they're paying our bills. They make our market. Okay, so the fact is that different funding serves different purposes. Like IDC is industrial, right? So their funding has to unlock specific things. If all funding serves the same things, then we're all just playing in the same space. So seed funding, or ideation funding is very limited in South Africa, but somebody's got to do that. Somebody's got to do VC, which is high growth. You're going to make that 10x growth numbers type funding. But at the same time, there's a reason why a lot of the equity investment is from Cape Town VC, is because who can access the fund, because we also have a VC business. And the point of any kind of fund is that you should be able to raise capital to be able to deploy capital. So if I can't raise the capital, I can't deploy capital. And the people that are able to raise the capital are the people with access to those people who have the capital. So if your billionaire friend can fund your VC, and you are going to fund who? You're going to fund people that you know and looks like you. So if somebody comes with a business from Chatsworth and you're going to be like, where's Chatsworth? What do they know? I'm not going to fund this because it's a risk, right? And in fact, are you even going to answer the email? Right? So let's also be realistic about access. Access matters. That's why I went from being at the JSE to being a funder myself. Why? Because I understand that if I, as a woman, don't come in, a diverse woman that comes from a township environment and understands what it means to fund a township business, no one's going to do it. So diversification in even this matters. The people who make the decisions matter.
Thank you so much. And the final question to you, Sonia, on new models of partnerships that we could pursue, especially at that local, regional level.
So in terms of funding, I think Cleo covered it quite substantially. I think what I wanted to just touch on is the partnerships, the funding partnerships that we believe is necessary. IDC does do quite a few grant funding programs, just I'm sure you're aware. So there are quite a few funding programs that we manage. We manage quite a number of grant funding programs from DTIC. So there's partnerships in that. But what we try to do is not become a society or not create NPOs or businesses that become fully dependent and needy on grant funding. And the idea is that we partner and expand. So you start the seed funding with DTIC funding, for instance, as a grant. You then go out, and we work quite actively with foreign DFIs, specifically in the green hydrogen now for just energy transition with foreign governments. So that is for us in partnerships that are going to make a difference in the local SMEs and a large business for that matter.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any inputs as we wrap up this conversation? Yes, ma'am. Anywhere else? Okay, go ahead.
I think my question is to all of you guys, since you are on knowledge and skills. I think I would say concerned with regards to the summit itself, more specifically quite now where we are when it comes to AI and technology. Most of you are touching on technology, but nobody mentioned AI. And if I look at it more specifically as somebody who works for an AI company, which is an international company, and I see the kind of training that we do on those AI labs and AI modules, what is it that you guys are actually hoping for the future? There's now an AI policy draft that was published on the 10th of April. And June is going to be the last month whereby we are supposed to actually put into that policy. What is it that you would like to actually contribute to us when it comes to incorporating the knowledge that we already have into all the algorithms when it comes to South Africa, so that we can, even if I don't have access to you, I can get access to an AI that has actual information with regards to whatever I need to actually inform myself and my family.
Fantastic. Okay, so AI helping that modeling. Anyone else? Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So, I mean, look, when it comes to AI and any kind of innovation, we use AI in our business in terms of helping with just from a funding process. You know what I mean? It works. Our AI now works with the credit analyst, right? With the investment analyst, and helps us identify any kind of gaps. But I'll say this about AI or any innovation. If you don't invest in innovation, you're going to pay for someone else's. So does that make sense? So if you look at AWS, cloud, the concept for AWS cloud was created here in South Africa, in Cape Town. We didn't commercialize it. We didn't invest in it. And Amazon did. Now we're all paying for Amazon. And we'll pay for Amazon for the next 30 years. And so we pay a heavy price, and we're going to continue to pay a heavy price for AI. And we're going to pay an even heavier price if we don't regulate it properly. So for instance, I think it was in the Netherlands, you can correct me if I'm wrong, where they had an immediate AI policy said that AI cannot steal someone's likeness, someone's voice, etc. That's a very important regulation. Because if someone can steal your likeness and there's no policy to protect you as an individual, what happens? So what maybe my investment mindset is, if you're not going to pay for it, you're going to suffer for it.
Anyone else? Okay, so final thoughts as we say goodbye in terms of these thought leadership conversations. What would you like to leave the delegates with, Spusi?
I think we have an opportunity here as a collective to influence some of the immediate simple things that can help move the needle in terms of making sure that, you know, enterprises are sustainable. And one of those things is, you know, how do we begin to influence the payment to enterprises, making sure that corporate companies and public organizations pay SMEs on time. So it's those type of, initiatives that we can run as a collective to make sure that, you know, as we work on these big ideas, there are basic things that we can do to contribute to the sustainability of enterprises. So that was just one of the examples. The second thing is, you know, what we are trying to build here is complex and it will take time. And I think when we speak in these forums, we think 2, 3 years, 5 years, but I think this is a 10, 20, 50 year issue and process. And for us to achieve like those quality outcomes, we have to have that outlook that some of these solutions that we are proposing, we probably won't be here to witness them. So it is important that when we have these conversations that we don't get discouraged, that we keep talking, but we understand that it will take time for things to move, especially when we are getting to the root causes of the challenges that we are trying to address with these solutions. So I think that is one thing that I'd like to leave.
Cleola?
I like that. It will take time. Reality check. I think, if you can imagine South Africa as South Africa Pty Limited, we're a business competing with many other businesses, Vietnam, Indonesia, Botswana, everybody. Some of them we can partner with, some of them actively are just competitors, right? And so if you start thinking of us as a business, we also need to think about what do we as a business want to do? How do we make money as a business? How do we enable the business to make money? And how do we shift from being a consumer, which is just buying goods from everyone else, to actually being a producer, whether it's innovation, technology, goods, etc., as a business that we can actively sell for this business to grow. So we currently are a business dragging along at 1% growth. We've got a lot of broken stuff lying around, broken computers and things, and the roof is leaking. So, but we don't have an innovation problem. We don't have a people problem. We don't even have a resource problem. We have a coordination problem, and we have a strategic leadership problem. So if we as a business want to be profitable, we need to start thinking of ourselves as that and what it will take to turn this business around.
But we have gees.
We have gees. It's really nice at the Christmas braai, and we like to laugh, but we're walking away without money, no paychecks. Yeah. So quite honestly, if we start thinking of ourselves, this is a business. We've put people in charge to be CEO, to be whoever. Something's not working here. So instead of saying, government, start thinking about what will it take for this business, South Africa, to be a competitive, compelling business that's going to make money and employ people, and let's scale the business, scale the building, and stop living in the in this little warehouse with the leaking roof.
Sonia.
I think two things. For me, and I used to tell my daughter this, is the first business that ever existed back in BC, whatever, that guy didn't have any support, no government policies, he just did his business. He got no funding. He just did it. And then lastly is just the issue about, and we see this all the time, the sense of entitlement of certain businessmen on, I want that funding, I need that funding, I deserve that funding, and I want it to be grant funding and highly concessional, irrespective of the fact whether you have a business, whether it is a sustainable business. So that's the mindset, that there's more than enough money in this country to fund businesses. It's not, we've got more than enough coming, I promise you, but there isn't enough business savvy in the street to actually make business work.
I think that's a very powerful place to leave it. So let me say thank you to all of you. Sonia Lochenberg, Head of Partnerships at Partnerships and Programs at the IDC. Seated next to her is Cleola Kunene, CEO of Equate Trade Finance. And seated right next to me is Busiso Rapekwane, the CEO of Transformation Legacy. Thank you. Thank you very much, Davis. Okay, so our host, our proprietor, our executive director is right here. She doesn't even want to miss a beat. So please, can you welcome for a short little tete-a-tete, a final conversation with the executive director of CADE, or CADE, Madumezulu Silinda. The future isn't only ahead of us, is what I heard the video saying. it says the future is inside of us. We need to really think about that. So where to from now? A roadmap on collective enterprises in South Africa.
Okay, thank you so much. And just to say thank you now that we are here. And we've spent these 2 whole days here. We'll spend just 3 minutes to just do the roadmap because I mean, a roadmap can take us another day if you think of it. Oh, okay. This chair scares me so much. Oh, okay. Okay, so 3 things that emerged from here. Maybe before then, to apologize on behalf of the president, Advocate Mtotulu. Prof. Bonang was sent to Siberia. I think he was sent to Liberia. So really, truly, he spent most of the whole time that he was supposed to be here at the DBSA waiting for his PA to direct him for a full hour. So CSIR instead of DBSA, it's so funny. But anyway, here we are. So 3 things that came out of here and that we are going to take forward. One is we do need a functioning system that converts fragmented enterprises into an investable, scalable value chains. That's basically what we are lacking based on what we have discussed here. And if we look at that, it is possible to start. Busi has just scared me so much about me not seeing the things we are talking about here. We really want to see it as a start if we can't see it, at the end. The second one is that we need to develop a mechanism to translate macro trade frameworks like the ACTA, the BRICS, the G20 now, and capital flows into the local investable production systems. And it is possible that us here can start. These 2 things that I've just mentioned are not going to be started by any other person. It's us here in the next 3 months or so. We must start. JP said so. A system that links enterprise activity to LED and municipal revenue generation. So it's those things that really we have discussed about yesterday and today. We actually have summarized it into those 4 things, and that is the roadmap. And those are the initiatives that we need to start right from here now, moving forward. Those 3 things are going to be started by us. Would you agree with me that we need a university of collective enterprises and a curriculum? Sorry, first let's hear him.
I would totally agree with that because I think one of the things we normally see is that the curriculum in our country is not designed, to educate young people to become entrepreneurs and, be self-made individuals. So I think it would be very, beneficial for our country to have curriculums that speak to such. Thank you.
Are you going to invest in the university?
Definitely, we are working with the QCTO in the space of the cooperative banks. But broadly, I come from the education where it's very much important that we look into our curriculum in the country, because we talk about graduates sitting at home, but there's no alignment between the curriculum and what is happening in the market. And we are busy feeding that. And countries next to us, Mozambique, they've been in the war for quite some time. But if you go today, the hawker on the street, they've got an occupational qualification. We are still talking about
occupational qualification. We are still designing programs. You talk about the green economy, the solar, what. Those qualifications, they've just been developed and not even tested. Then there's a lot. We need to start from basic education, look at forcing entrepreneur development to be learned from basic education.
But may I interrupt there? Those who say no, why? What's the no?
Issue of how framing the question. We don't need a university, dedicated university for this. We need to influence curriculum in existing universities and primary school all the way up to teach these things, because otherwise you're going to create this little special thing. I mean, we have TVET colleges right now that are supposed to, we lack artisanal skills in the country. We could teach that through the TVET colleges. So don't create a new thing. Make sure that the things we have already work. This is why, I mean, our work in the Inatsura I'm making now long. We talk about creating new cities. We have cities that are running down. Johannesburg, inner city. Boksburg, inner city. Fix what you already have, make it work, and that's the only way you can make your resources go a little further.
Okay, so maybe we need both. It's a very long discussion. Thank you so much for bringing that up. And I think we need to really look at that. And I think that's it from me.
Almost that's it. The missing middle, a lot was said today. So what can be done there to capacitate? I love that word. It's a South African word. I never heard it anywhere else.
So I'm not going to talk about what do we do to capacitate that, because we need to build. It is not there. I was talking to Temba yesterday. Actually, what we have diagnosed our country to be like since yesterday is that the top seems to be good. Somewhere here at the macro level, we know it's eroded. And then there's a hole. So it's like this. There's a hole here, and which is the missing. It's missing because it's not there. And it really, if we don't build this part, this can literally collapse into this space. It is very true. Whether you like it or not, one day it can collapse into this whole space. When Niva yesterday said, the ecosystem here has been totally eroded. And by ecosystem, it's the roads, the West Cleola, she just said so now, she's gone up. The roads, the water. So this really is a hope. Like, you really have to imagine it like this. And then it's us weakening here. So basically, it can collapse. So we need to build it rather than to capacity.
All right. And final question. This was the first, my understanding, of summits.
Yes.
So is there going to be a second? And what are the expectations, or what are your commitments? What are you holding delegates to with each summit?
So we are going to share the whole recording, as I've already indicated yesterday, and we are going to actually reconstruct, translate most of these things so that it is digestible. By the time you receive it, it will be more digestible. So if a person has said industrialized, we will try and ensure that you understand what industrialized is in terms of the recording, to just add there. And after that, we are also going to continue to share what we are going to be doing. So this is not something I can answer right now. We're going to sit down with the whole team, and Kakiso is also going to say, okay, we like what you've done. This is what we can commit going forward, you know, to help. But most of all is really to look for institutional partners who are going to support the work, because it is not cheap work. And then, yes, next year, we're going to have a much bigger CADE 2027 annual summit. It's starting, the planning is starting a week after now.
We thank you for your vision, Madume Zulu Skeli Silinda, the Executive Director of the Center for the Advancement of Dynamic Enterprise. Thank you for your vision, and thank you for these interesting conversations. All right, that's where we leave it. Because partnerships came up so strongly today, I'll leave you with the words of Helen Reimann-Schneider-Martin. She says, coming together is a beginning. Keeping together is a progress. But working together, that's the success. Thank you and goodbye.